I remember the day the letter came. It was a cold March morning, the kind where the air still bites at your fingers even though spring's only a few weeks away. The envelope was plain, no markings except my name printed neatly in black ink. I didn't think much of it at first, probably taxes or insurance. I sat at the kitchen table, poured myself a cup of coffee, and opened it with my pocket knife. Before we continue, make sure to hit the like button. Also tell us in the comments, what time is it where you are right now and which city are you watching from? I love seeing how far our stories travel. The letter wasn't from the county or the bank. It was from a law firm downtown I'd never heard of before. Inside was a single page addressed to the Langford Family Trust. My eyebrows knit together. I wasn't part of any family trust. I read the words again, slower this time, feeling each one stick in my throat. According to the document, the house I'd lived in for 40 years, the house I built with my own 2 hands, was now legally owned by that trust. My name wasn't listed anywhere. The trustee was my eldest son. At first I thought it had to be some kind of clerical mistake. A mix-up at the recorder's office maybe. But there it was, printed clearly. Transfer of ownership executed. My coffee went cold as I stared at the page. My hand shook a little. Not from fear exactly. More from the quiet realization that something had been done behind my back. I folded the letter and set it beside the sugar bowl. The kitchen was still, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator. I looked around, at the wood cabinets I built after my wife passed, the linoleum floor I'd replaced myself last summer. Every corner of this place carried the weight of memory, and now, legally, none of it was mine. When my eldest son Michael stopped by that evening, I asked him about it. He laughed, a short, uncomfortable kind of laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, it's just paperwork," he said, waving his hand like I was making a fuss over nothing. "It's better this way. It simplifies things for when you're gone. The lawyer said it was the smart move." Gone. The word landed heavier than I expected. I wasn't gone yet. I was standing right there, breathing, watching him lean against the counter like he owned the place. He must have seen something shift in my expression because he added quickly, "You still live here, Dad. Nothing changes day to day." But everything had changed. I smiled politely, the kind of smile you give when you don't trust yourself to speak. I told him I appreciated the help and that I'd look into it myself, just to understand. His smile tightened. He muttered something about how I didn't need to make this complicated and left soon after. When the front door shut, the house felt different. Colder somehow, like the air itself had turned against me. I walked down the hallway, touching the walls as I passed. Pine boards, I sanded myself, each nail hammered in back when my hands were steadier. I remembered the nights my wife and I painted this place, laughing about the streaks we left on each other's shirts. She'd called it our forever home. I went up to the attic later that night. The floorboards creaked beneath my slippers. In the far corner sat a metal box, the kind you find in old offices. Rusty latch, dents on the lid. Inside were deeds, receipts, old tax records. Proof of a life built one careful step at a time. I took out the original house deed from 1983. My signature was there. Blue ink, slightly faded. I laid it next to the new document from the law firm. The difference was obvious. My name was missing. Someone had filed a new transfer deed. Someone who thought I wouldn't notice. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my recliner, the papers spread out across my lap, listening to the clock tick on the wall. I kept thinking of my wife's voice, how she used to tell the boys, "Your father built this house with his own hands." Every beam, every nail, and now one of them had erased that. The next morning I called the number listed on the letter. The receptionist put me on hold for what felt like an hour before a man finally came on the line. His tone was polite, rehearsed. "Mr. Langford, everything was processed according to standard estate protocols. Your son authorized the transfer on behalf of the trust." "And who authorized my son?" I asked. There was a pause. Paper shuffled on the other end. "Sir, I believe you signed a consent form last year during estate planning." "I never signed any consent form." "Well, our records show your signature." That word hung between us. Signature. After we hung up, I drove to the law firm myself. The secretary at the front desk smiled the way people do when they don't mean it. A man in a gray suit came out, mid-30s, expensive haircut, eyes too sharp for that kind of kindness. He led me into his office and handed me a file. Inside was a copy of a document titled Consent to Transfer Property to Family Trust. And there, clear as day, was my name, written in handwriting that looked eerily similar to mine but not quite right. The curl of the L was wrong, the spacing was off. My hand went cold. "Who notarized this?" I asked quietly. "Your son did," the lawyer said, glancing at the papers. "He works with a notary through his business." I stared at the signature until the lines blurred. I wasn't angry, not yet, just stunned by the precision of the lie. My own name turned into evidence against me. My son's words from the night before echoed in my head. "It's just paperwork, Dad." Driving home, the wind howled against the truck, and for the first time in years, I felt like a stranger heading toward a house that wasn't mine. The next few days passed like a dream I couldn't wake from. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt familiar. The morning light still came through the kitchen window, landing on the same old checkered curtains my wife had sewn. The same clock ticked above the stove, steady as ever. But the house had turned into something else now. Not a home, but evidence. Every sound felt like it belonged to someone else. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found, not right away. My younger son, Daniel, called on Sunday to check in. He asked about the weather, my blood pressure, the usual things sons ask when they're trying to sound caring but not too curious. I almost told him about the trust, about the signature that wasn't mine. But I didn't. I wanted to hear which side of the fence he was on before I gave him a reason to choose. Instead, I asked how work was. He said Michael had been helping him with some finances, that he was grateful for it. That told me enough. After the call, I wandered down the hallway toward the bedrooms. The boards creaked under my feet, a sound I used to find comforting. It meant life was happening in this house. Kids running, doors slamming, laughter spilling from room to room. Now it was just me and that sound, echoing off the walls like a memory that refused to die. In Michael's old room, the wallpaper was still peeling in the corner. I ran my hand along the rough edge, remembering the night we put it up together. He must have been 10 then, standing on a chair too small for him, trying to match the seams just right. He'd laughed every time he messed up. He used to look at me like I could fix anything. Now he looked at me like an obstacle. I sat on the edge of his bed, the mattress sagging in the same place it always had. I tried to understand it. Maybe he thought he was helping, setting things up for the future, like he said. Maybe he believed his own lie, but a man doesn't forge his father's name by accident. That takes intention. That takes distance. I went back to the attic that night, flashlight in hand. The beam caught dust drifting through the air, the kind that only moves when you breathe. I dug through the metal box again, this time pulling out every file I could find. Loan papers, home insurance, the old mortgage documents from when the house was first built. Each one had my name on it, signed in the same steady hand. My hand. I laid them out across the attic floor like puzzle pieces, side by side with the trust document. When you've built things for a living, cabinets, decks, entire homes, you learn to notice the smallest details. The slant of a line, the way a nail bends when driven wrong. And that's when I saw it. Whoever forged my signature had copied the wrong version. They used the way I signed back in the early 2000s, before my hand injury. I hadn't written my L that way in nearly 15 years. That was my proof. Still, proof is only as strong as the person willing to stand behind it. I spent the next morning sitting at the dining table with my reading glasses on, writing down everything I remembered. Dates, conversations, the day Michael first mentioned estate planning. I wrote it all in an old composition book, each line steady and deliberate. Not angry words, not even emotional ones, just facts. I'd spent 30 years as a carpenter. I knew the importance of foundations. This was mine. Around noon, Daniel showed up unannounced. He let himself in like always. "Hey, Dad," he called from the hallway. "You around?" I took a moment before answering. "In here." He stepped into the kitchen holding 2 cups of coffee from the diner in town. "Thought you could use this." We sat in silence for a while, the smell of burnt coffee filling the air. Finally, he said, "Michael told me you've been asking questions about the trust, said you were upset." I looked at him. "Wouldn't you be?" He shifted uncomfortably. I think he meant well. He said it was about protecting the family's assets, taxes, probate, all that. That's what he told you?" He nodded. "He said you agreed to it last year." "I didn't." Daniel frowned. "Then how'd they get your signature?" "That's what I plan to find out." He stared at me for a long time, like he was trying to read whether I was confused or serious. Then he sighed. "You know how Mike gets. Once he's decided something's right, there's no talking him out of it. But maybe don't make it a big deal, okay? He'll just dig in deeper if you push." I smiled faintly. "I've handled worse fires than this, son." After he left, I walked down the hallway again. The air felt heavy, thick with things unsaid. On the wall hung an old photograph, the 4 of us standing in front of the house when it was still new. My wife had her arm around me. Michael was missing his front tooth. Daniel was holding a toy hammer. I traced their faces with my thumb one by one, then let my hand drop. That evening I called an old friend, Tom Riley, a retired real estate lawyer I used to fish with. He answered on the second ring, same gravelly voice as always. "Haven't heard from you in years, Ed. What's going on?" "I need a favor," I said quietly. "I think my son forged my name." There was a long silence on the line before he spoke. "Bring me everything you've got tomorrow morning." When I hung up, I stood in the hallway a while longer, the photograph still in my hand. For the first time in weeks, I felt something sharper than confusion. It wasn't quite anger, it was clarity. The kind that comes when you realize the fire's already started and all that's left to do is grab the hose. Tom Riley's office was smaller than I remembered, books piled high on every surface, the faint smell of pipe tobacco lingering even though he'd quit years ago. He was the kind of man who carried authority without needing to raise his voice, and when I handed him the stack of papers I'd gathered, he didn't say a word for nearly 10 minutes. He just read, line by line. Then he leaned back, folded his glasses, and sighed. "Ed," he said, "this isn't just sloppy paperwork. This is deliberate." I felt my stomach tighten. "So it's forged." "Not just forged," he said. "It's coordinated. Whoever drafted this trust made sure you were cut out completely. No life estate clause, no retained interest, nothing. That's not an oversight. That's intent." I stared at the desk, the edges of the file digging into my fingers. Tom continued, "The signature could be challenged, but you'll need corroboration, something that proves you didn't authorize the change." I told him about my hand injury, about how my handwriting had changed years ago. His eyes lit slightly. That helps, but we'll need more than that. Paper trails don't lie. And sometimes they tell more truth than people ever will. He promised to make a few calls, check the public records, see exactly when the transfer was filed. I thanked him and left, the sound of rain tapping against his office window following me out into the street. When I got home, I spent the rest of the afternoon pacing the living room trying to quiet my thoughts. But quiet didn't come. Every memory of Michael replayed itself like film reels on a loop. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, the first time he'd driven my old Ford truck. Each one now felt contaminated by what I'd learned. 3 days later, I got another envelope. This one hand-delivered, sealed in heavy cream paper. The logo on the corner read Greenridge Financial Services. For a second, I thought it was junk mail, but when I tore it open, I froze. It was a notice of refinancing. Apparently, the Langford Family Trust had used the house as collateral for a line of credit. $90,000 approved just last month. My home, the one that wasn't mine anymore. The next morning, a young man in a navy suit came by, introduced himself as Ethan Price from Greenridge Bank. He was polite, maybe 30, with a salesman's smile that had seen too much training. He said he was there to confirm occupancy, standard procedure for the trust's refinancing file. I invited him in. My instincts told me to stay calm. If he was part of this, I needed information, not confrontation. "Mr. Langford," he said, looking down at his tablet, "our records show the property belongs to the Langford Family Trust, managed by your son, Michael Langford. You're listed as resident and beneficiary. Just need to verify some details for compliance." I nodded slowly. "And who signed the refinancing agreement?" He scrolled, oblivious to the tension rising in my chest. "That would be Michael Langford, trustee. Looks like everything was approved electronically last month. Nice setup. Low interest, fixed rate." He smiled as though complimenting my son's good business sense. I asked, "Does the bank require the original owner's consent when the property was transferred from private ownership to trust?" He blinked. "I'm not sure, sir. I just handle occupancy. But usually, if all documents are notarized and recorded, we don't question the transfer." I forced a polite nod. "Appreciate your time." When he left, I watched his car roll down the street, tires hissing over the wet pavement. My hand clenched around the paper he'd left behind. Proof that my son had already used the house to take out more money. Debt, dressed up as business. That evening, I drove back to Tom's office. He looked over the refinancing letter and his face darkened. "That settles it," he said. "This isn't about estate planning. He's leveraged your property. If he defaults, the bank can seize it. And you'll be evicted." For a long time, I couldn't speak. The words wouldn't come. I thought about all the nights I'd slept under that roof through storms and summers and every kind of season. My wife's laugh in the kitchen. The sound of the boys chasing each other down the hallway. And now a banker's stamp could wipe all of it away. "What do we do?" I asked quietly. "We start a paper trail of our own," Tom said. "You document everything. Calls, letters, visits. Keep copies of every envelope. We'll file a formal inquiry with the county clerk. Request digital logs of who filed the deeds. Once we have that, we can prove fraud." He paused. "But you need to prepare yourself, Ed. When this comes out, it won't just be about property, it'll be about your son." That night, I sat in my truck outside the house for nearly an hour before going in. The porch light glowed weakly against the mist. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt borrowed. Like I was living in someone else's house waiting for permission to stay. I went to the hallway where that old photograph still hung. My wife, the boys, all of us smiling like the future was certain. I touched the frame, then took it down and laid it face down on the table. If Michael wanted to treat this place like a transaction, then so be it. I'd start treating it like evidence. The next morning, I began scanning every document into my computer. Tax statements, old letters, mortgage payments. I backed them up twice, one copy for me, one for Tom. It felt mechanical, like rebuilding a house nail by nail, except this time the material wasn't wood or plaster, it was truth. By nightfall, the composition book I'd started was already half full. The last thing I wrote before bed was a single line underlined twice. He called it paperwork. I'll call it proof. I met the new lawyer on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after the visit from the banker. Tom had referred me to her, said she was one of the few left in town who still believed that a person's word meant something. Her name was Margaret Hayes, a retired family attorney who'd once handled wills and estates for half the county. Her office sat above a hardware store on Main Street. No polished marble, no chrome nameplates. Just a small wooden sign and the faint smell of dust and old carpet. I liked that. It reminded me of when business was done face-to-face, not through screens and electronic signatures. She greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything twice. "Tom Riley tells me you've had a rough few months, Mr. Langford," she said. "Just trying to figure out when I stopped owning my own life," I answered. She motioned for me to sit, then unfolded the papers I'd brought. She read silently, page after page, her expression tightening with each one. When she was done, she placed her glasses on the desk and leaned back. "You weren't mistaken," she said finally. This was deliberate. Whoever drafted these documents knew exactly what they were doing. I nodded, though hearing it aloud felt like a punch to the chest. "Can I undo it?" "Maybe," she said, "but it'll take time and precision. Property fraud cases involving trusts are slippery, especially when family's involved. Judges like to believe these things are just misunderstandings." She paused, studying me. "Do you still have a relationship with your son?" I laughed quietly. "If you can call silence a relationship." She didn't smile. "Then we'll proceed as though that silence is part of the evidence." She showed me where my supposed consent form had been filed and pointed out what Tom had already suspected. The signature was scanned from an older document, not copied, not forged by hand, digitally lifted. That explained why the curl of my L looked off. It wasn't written, it was traced. "Can you prove that?" I asked. "Oh, absolutely," she said. "Digital replication leaves a fingerprint, so to speak. We'll hire a handwriting and image analyst. But before we go that far, I'll send an inquiry to the recorder's office. Ask for the file's metadata. If the upload didn't come from your personal account, it'll show whose did." Her confidence gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks. Direction. She started drafting the first letter right there, tapping the keys on her old typewriter. Not a computer. A real machine that clacked with every word. "Paper leaves a trail," she said without looking up. "Emails disappear, but paper has weight." I sat there listening to that sound, the steady rhythm of keys hitting metal. It reminded me of hammering nails. Methodical, purposeful. When she finished, she handed me a carbon copy. "We'll send this certified mail. And Mr. Langford, don't contact your son, not yet. Let's get the truth in writing before emotions get involved." I agreed, though part of me wanted to drive straight to Michael's office and throw the papers on his desk. But I'd learned something from my years of carpentry. If you rush the foundation, the whole structure collapses later. That night I sat in my recliner and thought about my wife again. She'd been the one who believed in talking things through, in forgiveness before anger. But she'd also believed in fairness. "Never let anyone write you out of your own story," she used to tell me when we paid the bills together. That's how people disappear, not all at once, but on paper first. I think she would have understood what I was doing now. A few days later, Margaret called. "Got the file metadata," she said. "The document was uploaded from your son's business email address, not yours. That's enough to file a preliminary complaint." Her words hit me like the first crack of thunder before a storm. I knew what came next wouldn't be easy. Hearings, filings, months of waiting. But it would be something solid to stand on. "Do it," I said. "File it." She hesitated. "Once we do, there's no going back. He'll be served. It'll be public." "I've lived long enough in silence," I said. "I'd rather live in truth." When we hung up, I walked down the hallway, that same old photograph still lying face down on the table. I picked it up and looked at it again. My wife's smile seemed smaller now, like she knew what was coming even back then. I set it upright this time. Maybe it was superstition, but it felt wrong to keep her turned away while I was fighting for what we built. 2 days later, a man in a brown uniform showed up at Michael's office with the envelope. Langford versus Langford, petition for fraudulent transfer of property and forged signature complaint. I didn't see it happen, but I imagined the look on his face when he read my name in the header. Maybe surprise, maybe anger. Maybe for the first time understanding that his father wasn't as easy to erase as a signature on a page. That evening I sat by the window watching the sun sink behind the trees. The air was quiet, still heavy with spring rain. For the first time since this began, I felt steady. Not happy, not vindicated, just steady. There was still a long road ahead. Hearings, lawyers, questions I didn't want to answer. But I was finally walking it on my own terms. My wife used to say every storm ends the same way. One last crack of thunder, then the silence after. Maybe that silence wasn't emptiness. Maybe it was peace trying to find its way back in. The courthouse smelled like waxed floors and old air, the kind that's been recycled through too many years and too many lies. I sat on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, my file folder balanced on my knees, trying to steady the rhythm of my breathing. It reminded me of the moments before a storm, the way the air goes still, like even the world is holding its breath. Margaret sat beside me, flipping through her notes. "Remember," she said softly, "this is just a preliminary hearing. We're not proving the whole case today. We're just showing the judge there's enough reason to move forward." I nodded. I've waited my whole life for people to listen. I can wait one more morning. When the bailiff called our case, we stood and walked into the courtroom. Michael was already there, sitting at the defendant's table in a dark suit that didn't fit him right. Too new, too stiff. His wife sat behind him, eyes sharp and watchful. He didn't look at me, not once. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and a voice like gravel, took her seat and adjusted her glasses. "Langford versus Langford," she read aloud, scanning the file. "This is a family matter, unfortunate but not unusual. Let's proceed." Margaret rose and began speaking. Calm, measured, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen more betrayals than most could imagine. She laid out the facts: the deed transfer, the forged consent form, the refinancing, the digital evidence showing Michael's email as the upload source. The judge interrupted once. "You're certain the father never signed this?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. We have both a handwriting analyst and metadata evidence to confirm it. The document was digitally replicated from an older file belonging to my client." When she sat down, Michael's attorney, a younger man, all charm and practiced confidence, stood up. "Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding," he began. "My client was simply trying to protect his father's estate. The transfer was done in good faith, with the intent of preserving family property. There was no fraud here, only miscommunication." The judge glanced at him. "And the signature?" He hesitated. My client believed his father had approved the change verbally. The file upload was a clerical convenience. Margaret leaned toward me and whispered, "He just admitted replication." I stayed quiet, eyes fixed on my son. He still hadn't looked at me. His hands were folded tightly in his lap, knuckles white. Maybe it was nerves, maybe guilt. When the judge asked if I wanted to say anything, I stood slowly. My knees ached, but my voice was steady. "Your Honor, I spent 40 years building that house. Every piece of wood, every shingle, every nail. I put it there myself. My wife and I raised our boys there. We made it a home, not an investment. When she passed, I promised her I'd keep it safe. I didn't give my son permission to take it, and I sure as hell didn't sign away my name." The courtroom went silent. Even the young lawyer stopped taking notes. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the ceiling vent. Michael's attorney cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Your Honor, emotional appeals aren't evidence." The judge looked at him unimpressed. "Sometimes they're the most honest evidence we get." She tapped her pen against the file, then leaned back. "Here's what I see. A signature that doesn't match, a digital trail that leads to the son, and a refinancing agreement that benefited only one party. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a matter that deserves full examination." She turned to me. "Mr. Langford, I'm ordering discovery. Both sides will produce all documents, communications, and records related to the trust within 30 days. After that, we'll schedule a full evidentiary hearing." Her gavel struck once, sharp as a gunshot. "We're adjourned." As everyone stood, Michael finally looked at me. His face was pale, eyes hard and cold. He shook his head slightly like I'd betrayed him. I wanted to say something, anything. But words failed. What could I say that wouldn't sound like a lifetime's worth of disappointment? Outside, the spring air was cool and damp. Margaret walked beside me, saying little. After a while, she asked, "You holding up?" "I'm fine," I said, though my voice betrayed me. "It's strange. I thought I'd feel angry, but I mostly just feel tired." "That's what truth does," she said. "It wears you down before it sets you free." When I got home that evening, I went straight to the attic. I opened the metal box again and pulled out an envelope I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a handwritten note from my wife, one she'd left tucked into the family Bible after her diagnosis. Her handwriting was small, neat, the kind of careful script she used when something mattered. "Ed," it said, "if the boys ever forget what you've built, remind them gently. If they still don't listen, remind them firmly. But always remind them." I sat there under the slanted roof, the letter trembling in my hand. Outside, rain began to fall, steady and rhythmic, tapping against the shingles like distant applause. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt seen. Not by the court, not by Margaret, but by her. The woman who'd stood beside me when the first board was nailed, the first wall raised, the first foundation poured. This was her fight too. And I was done being quiet. It's strange how long it takes for a truth to become real. You can fight for it, document it, present it in front of a judge and a jury of your peers. But until the words are spoken aloud, it doesn't feel like it belongs to you. That day in court was no different. It had been almost 2 months since the preliminary hearing. The case had dragged on longer than I'd hoped, but now we were here, the day we'd get an answer, the final ruling. The courtroom felt smaller than it had before, tighter. The judge had already reviewed the documents, the forged signatures, the emails, the financial records. She'd heard both sides, and now all that was left was her decision. Michael didn't look at me when he entered, not even for a second. His lawyer had been trying to spin the case into something more family-friendly for weeks, claiming it was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. But today there was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken certainty. I sat quietly, leaning back in my chair. Margaret sat beside me, calm and prepared as always, but her eyes flickered with the kind of focused energy that comes when you're waiting for someone to pull a trigger. The judge walked in, and the room stood in unison. She was the same woman as before, but now there was something different in the way she held herself. Her movements were slower, more deliberate. She was making sure we knew this wasn't just a case. It was a statement. We all sat, and for a few long moments the judge said nothing. She shuffled through papers, tapped her pen thoughtfully, and finally looked up. This is a family matter that has unfortunately escalated to the courtroom. My task is to separate the emotions from the facts and to find a path forward that is just. She paused again, staring down at the papers before her. Mr. Langford, she said, addressing me, your claim has been substantiated. The evidence of fraud is clear. The signatures were digitally replicated from an earlier document, and the funds you provided for the home have not been returned or acknowledged as a loan. Your son did indeed leverage your property without your consent, as you've proven. A small knot in my chest loosened at her words. Finally, after all the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the endless hours of paperwork and phone calls, finally someone recognized the truth. But then the judge's voice shifted slightly. However, this case has also revealed something important. A breakdown of trust. This was not just about a forged signature or property rights. This was about a father and a son who no longer saw eye to eye. I could feel Michael's eyes on me now. He wasn't looking away, and for the first time I saw something flicker behind that hardened exterior. It was guilt, maybe, or fear. The judge continued. While the court recognizes the fraud committed against you, Mr. Langford, I must also take into account the family dynamic. This is not just a financial dispute, it's a rupture of relationships. The court does not take this lightly. She turned back to the papers and nodded slowly. I'm ordering that the property be returned to you, Mr. Langford, with full acknowledgement of your 40% equity stake in the home. The funds taken through the refinancing will be returned to you, minus the value of any unpaid mortgage amounts. This will include interest accrued. There it was, the verdict, clear and final. Michael was losing, and I was winning. My heart should have swelled with victory. After everything, after months of fighting, the truth was mine. I was getting my money back, my equity, my rightful share. But as the judge spoke, I realized something. It wasn't the victory that mattered anymore. She went on. However, the court does not intend to order punitive damages. What's been done here, while illegal, does not warrant further punishment in the eyes of the law. I will also be scheduling a mediation session for the parties involved to attempt a resolution outside of further litigation. I barely heard her finish. My thoughts were consumed by Michael sitting across the room. His face had drained of color, his mouth set in a hard line. His lawyer didn't look happy either, scribbling furiously in his notebook, likely preparing for the next step. But Michael had no one else to blame now. He could lie about the papers, he could lie to the bank, but he couldn't lie to me. I caught his eyes for the first time in months. He didn't look away. I saw the weight of everything he had tried to ignore, and for a moment, I thought he might actually say something. An apology, maybe, or at least an admission. But then the moment passed. He looked at the floor. You've won, Dad, he muttered under his breath. His voice was barely audible, a hollow echo of the man I'd once known. You've got what you wanted. The judge banged her gavel. This case is concluded. We will schedule mediation, but that is all for today. As I stood up to leave, Margaret patted my shoulder. You did well. It's over. You got what you deserved. But as I walked out of the courtroom, I felt none of the triumph I expected. I had won the case, won back what was mine, but the room felt colder than ever. The victory felt hollow, like I'd been handed back something that was never truly mine to begin with. Outside, the air was crisp. It was the first sign of spring in the way the trees were just starting to bud. But it felt like a new beginning for everything but me. The house was mine again, at least in a legal sense. But I knew the emotional distance between me and my son wasn't something the court could fix. Michael was lost to me now, and no amount of money or property would ever bring back the relationship we once had. When I got home, I went straight to the kitchen. The house was still quiet. I set my briefcase down on the counter, then walked over to the dining room table. I picked up the old photograph of my family, my wife, my sons, all of us standing in front of the house we built. I turned it face down again. Maybe this was how things were meant to end. The house restored, the equity returned, but the family forever fractured. The truth had cost me something more valuable than I realized. It had cost me the chance to ever heal the wound between me and Michael. The house was still, as it had been for months now. Even the wind had quieted outside, leaving only the occasional sound of branches scratching against the windows. It was a cold evening, and I was alone again. It was strange how normal that felt. Strange how the quiet had become my constant companion. I stood in the kitchen for a while, staring out the window at the bare trees. The spring buds hadn't come yet, and the gray clouds that had hung over us for weeks now seemed to have settled into the very bones of the house. But it didn't feel like winter anymore. It didn't feel like I was stuck in time. I walked down the hallway toward the attic, the sound of my footsteps the only noise in the house. There was something about the attic that felt like the last piece of me that hadn't been touched. The attic was where everything had started, all the dreams, all the memories. It was where we'd stored the first things that mattered. I opened the door slowly, the old hinges creaking. The light above flickered for a second before coming on. I stepped inside, the air thick with dust. The old metal box sat in the far corner where I'd left it after the trial. I hadn't touched it since, but now I felt like I needed to. Like there was something waiting for me inside, something I hadn't seen before. I knelt down and opened it carefully, as I had so many times before. Inside were papers, photographs, old receipts. But this time something else caught my eye. An envelope, plain and unmarked, tucked beneath a pile of old tax records. I pulled it out slowly, wondering what it was. When I opened it, I found a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. My wife's neat, careful script. Ed, it read. If you're reading this, it means you've made it through something I couldn't. I want you to know that I never doubted you. I never doubted your strength, your ability to weather storms. But there's something you need to understand about this family. It's not just the house we built. It's the love we gave, the sacrifices we made. That's what's always been ours. And no one can take that from you. Even when it feels like you've lost everything, you still have that. I sat there for a long time, the words spinning in my head. Her words. She had always believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself. Even now, when the house was legally mine again, when I had the financial victory. I was still here, alone, holding on to the past in a way I hadn't fully understood until now. I didn't need to hold on to the house as proof of what I'd done. I didn't need to fight for ownership of it any longer. What I had built wasn't just in the walls or the beams, it was in every step I had taken to raise my sons, to live honestly, to be the man I promised I'd be. For a long time, I'd thought that regaining what was mine would fix everything. I thought that the court's judgment, the return of the house, would bring back the connection I had with Michael. But now I understood that it wasn't the property I was fighting for. It was the respect, the recognition of my place in my own family, and the acknowledgement of what I had contributed, not just financially but emotionally. I closed the box and set it back in the corner. The light overhead flickered again, then steadied. I stood up and walked back to the hallway. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I went into the kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the table. The house felt different now, not just in the sense that it was mine again, but in the sense that I had finally understood something important. I wasn't defined by what I lost. I was defined by what I'd built. And no matter how many times the world tried to take it from me, I was the one who held the hammer. I was the one who could rebuild. I thought about Michael. I thought about the man he had become, the choices he'd made, and how they had set us both on this path. I knew he wouldn't be calling anytime soon. I knew that whatever the court had decided, we would never return to what we were. But I didn't need to wait for him anymore. I finished my coffee and stood up, looking around at the walls of the house, at the room I had once filled with the sound of laughter and love. It was still here. The house was still here. But it wasn't just a building. It was a place where memories had been made, where I had given everything I had, even when I didn't have much to give. The attic light flickered off behind me as I turned toward the door. This chapter was over, and I would begin again, on my own terms. If you found Edward's story meaningful, make sure to hit that like button. It helps us share more stories of resilience and justice, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Edward did the right thing by fighting for what was his, or was there another way? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of real-life challenges and victories. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it with them. Sometimes the right story at the right time can make all the difference.